Did you get a chance to look at that Chaos book that I told you about?
Yeah.
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 Tom O'Neill, who is a friend of my good friend Greg Fitzsimmons, wrote an insane book that took him 20 years about Manson and the CIA and LSD. And what did you think about all that?
Well, you've touched on some. I mean, or Tom touched on some really interesting things that. What I liked about his book, and I went through it, I read it, is that he's actually, I think, very honest about the shortcomings, right, of what he ended up doing, right, and the research that he went through, and where he couldn't draw connections. So I give him a lot of credit. I think it's well worth the read, and. You know, it's a hell of just a personal story that it took him this fucking long, right, to make his way through, in a variety of reasons. But
luckily, it's been a tremendous success.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really he sold out almost immediately, and the paperbacks are sold out too. I mean, look,
Manson
reprinting
is a huge draw, right?
It is
but
it's also it's a fantastic account of all the things that happened with the Manson family and all those people that were alive back then, about how this guy kept getting out of jail, and they kept arresting him, and they kept saying, this is above my pay grade, and they would let him out.
Yeah, and that's for me, that's the strangest part about the whole story, right? I mean, this idea that, was Manson, a lab rat for the CIA, and, how far down that rabbit hole do you want to go? Well, O'Neill is pretty clear about that, right? That's not a particularly solid connection. It's a tenuous connection, I think he called it, between one of what used to be a contractor, a researcher for that old chestnut MK Ultra,
Jolly West.
Yeah, Jolly West. Yeah.
What did you think about all that? Like, I'm sure you know about Operation Midnight Climax and all the stuff that's absolutely true.
Yeah, I don't know. It'd be interesting to know how many people are aware. I mean, I know some people that that's what they do.
Let's explain Midnight Climax. Yeah. Operation Midnight Climax was a CIA-funded program where they dosed up Johns. They created brothels and dosed up Johns with LSD against their knowledge.
Yeah,
and without their knowledge, and let them fornicate and have a good old time with these ladies of the evening.
Man,
and,
my God,
and watch them and film them and study them.
I know. And when you say it that way, I'm in. If you want money to produce that movie, but it's it is actually it's true. Look, it fell under the sort of umbrella of this MK Ultra, which is public knowledge. I'm not, obviously we're not talking that term.
Well, let's also give them the benefit of the doubt. When LSD was synthesized by Albert Hoffman, they really needed to figure out what the fuck this was. And they need to figure out, like, could this be used against Americans? Could this be used against the president? Like, what is this? Is this a truth serum? Like, what are the benefits? What's the pros and cons? And what are the dangers of this stuff?
Well, and that's
from a national security angle, it's very important that they did study it.
Right. And so from context, and again, we talked about that towards the beginning, is which is something we don't normally do, right? So we're judging people from history now and so we're not using context of, well, what was the what were the conditions?
We're talking about the 1950s, the 1960s.
Well, late 40s even.
Right.
I mean, so what have you got? You got the end of the World War II. You got the Cold War. It's the late 40s. You've got the Soviet Union that is heavily invested in a variety of experiments. Mind control, brainwashing was the sort of the term of the culture, right? And brainwashing was a big issue. Not a big issue, but it captured people's imagination back then. So the late 40s, early 50s, it was the Korean War. We had an existential threat, right? We had nukes pointed at each other. We had, drills in schools, kids hiding under desks. I mean, what the fuck? So with the fear that the Chinese or the Soviets were going to develop mind control abilities was pervasive. And I know, you talk about it now and everybody rolls their eyes and goes, oh my God. But you're absolutely right that you have to understand the context with which then Alan Dulles, who was at the time the director of the CIA.
By the way, the guy who Kennedy fired.
Yes.
And wound up being a part of the Warren Commission after Kennedy was murdered, which was very strange.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Keep going.
Oh, I like that. I like where that could go. So anyway, we got Alan Dulles, who in 53, early in 53, says, all right, we have to understand what the Soviets are doing, particularly the Soviets. But we also had, again, I'm sure some folks listening know all this, but a lot of folks probably don't. We had POWs returning, American POWs returning from Korea. That was a big issue, right? Because some of them came back, again, quote unquote, brainwashed, and some of them didn't want to return because, again, brainwashing, mind control that, perhaps the Chinese had developed these techniques. So initially the idea was defensive. How do we protect ourselves against this new threat within this Cold War, against these enemies who appear to be devoting a great deal of resources against this? Well, so initially it started out as a defensive effort. MK Ultra was the umbrella name for a whole bunch, over 140 projects, sub-projects underneath MK Ultra. And it was all based around chemical substances, use of chemicals, use of drugs, behavioral issues with human beings, creating false memories, deleting memory, influencing the behavior, again, of individuals. There were a variety of projects that fell under this MK Ultra, and it was, again, starting out as a defensive issue, but then quickly became sort of an offense. How do we become the leader in all of this? Which is typical, right? It's typical in how things develop. It's like cyber warfare. Initially it's defensive, and now you think, okay, now we got to figure out how to make it work on our behalf.
And sometimes it's important, like when they shut down the Iran nuclear program with a virus, essentially a computer virus.
No, absolutely. And where this went off the rails, in a handful of ways, in many ways, was testing on unwitting subjects. Things such as LSD and a variety of other substances. Yeah, whoops. And those subjects, unwitting subjects, ranged everything from in federal prisons to state mental hospitals.
And that's where Manson comes in.
And that's where Manson comes in, and a variety of other people, who. I would recommend people, dig in. Don't settle on just one account. And one of the things that people should also do if they want to read about this is read any testimony that came out of the CIA. And there was some testimony. There were documents written by the Inspector General back in 50, and this time period was about 53 through at least officially acknowledged 1964. And then the program was wrapped up. Supposedly there were still federal programs, military programs, others that were still looking into issues related to the use of chemical substances for everything, again, from interrogation to behavioral adjustment. And a lot of these things were funded through cutouts. So you'd set up, again, this is early 50s, mid 50s, early 60s. You'd set up financing vehicles, through, say, what appear to be non-threatening grant programs, from research institutes. So you'd loop in academic institutions or researchers. And MK Ultra had, at least acknowledged anyway, over 80 academic institutions and others that were either wittingly or unwittingly working on their behalf in various research programs. So yeah, this midnight climax program, basically they'd kit out a safe house as a brothel, and they would have the hookers slip LSD or whatever substance to the johns, and then behind a mirror you'd have a researcher, right? I mean, this is where it got weird. Sitting there, having a drink and watching these, the hooker and the John have sex, and then they'd be analyzing the impact of the LSD on them in terms of their ability to talk, and would they...
Was the hooker in on it?
Yeah, the hooker was in on it. And
was she an employee of the CIA?
And it wasn't just the agency, like the Army was involved in these things as well. But... they would get, cash payments, and oftentimes the get out of jail free card.
Ladies, if you're out there,
if you're out there,
listen to me.
Come on.
Whatever you need.
Come forward.
I'm here for
Come
you.
forward. But
Come
there was
on the show. Let's talk. You can wear a Boba Fett mask. I don't care. We'll hide your identity. I don't know why I said Boba Fett.
But I mean, just imagine. I mean, so it's okay. So this was clearly, was off the rails, right?
Yeah.
And they had one of the guys that was involved in this. He was with what used to be called the Federal Bureau of Narcotics. A guy named George White, was involved in like the San Francisco cat house, and according to the stories, he'd sit there and with a martini in his hand and watch the couple have sex, and then he would have like prepped the hooker to say, okay, after sex, now this appears to be the best time to get them talking, so ask them about their job and let's see if they'll talk about their job. The idea being, could we influence and entrap potential assets overseas for operational reasons? Was there some use, for operational purposes? But basically, it was just, George getting his rocks off, watching couples having sex, and very, very strange shit. But you're right in that, and so again, this went on till '64. MK Ultra, interestingly enough, not to spend too much time on it, but Richard Helms was the director at the time in the early 70s. And he and a guy named Sidney Gottlieb, who was the head of technical services of the agency, they agreed that the smart thing to do in '73, before Richard Helms left and Gottlieb left the agency, was to destroy all the records. So they purged all the records of MK Ultra that they thought existed. This was investigated in the Church Committee back in '75. And then 76, I think it was, they found a bunch of financial records, that had not been purged because they had been kept, audits of, and again, you're talking about like 149 subprojects of MK Ultra. So you can imagine each subproject has its own accounting, and you got to turn in your receipts for the LSD that you bought or the hooker you paid off or whatever. So here's my receipt. Can I have my $12 or whatever you paid for a hooker back then? And so probably not $12, but they found some financial records, and so that became then a matter of another investigation up on the Hill. And Stansfield Turner, the time the CIA director, testified at that point. And that's why I brought my laptop, is because Stansfield Turner's testimony is actually pretty interesting as far as MK Ultra goes. And he talks about, we've attempted to group the activities covered by the 149 subprojects into categories under descriptive headings, wouldn't you? In broad outline, at least, this presents the contents of these files. The headings of the categories of all these various projects that ran under MK Ultra, and this gives you a pretty good, quick sense of what they were doing at the time. Research into the effects of behavioral drugs and/or alcohol. There were 17 sub-projects probably not involving human testing. This is a testimony from the director of the CIA, Stansfield Turner. 14 sub-projects definitely involving tests on human volunteers. 19 sub-projects probably including tests on human volunteers. While not known, some of these sub-projects may have included tests on unwitting subjects as well.
While not known?
Well, not known. And then 6 sub-projects definitely involving tests on unwitting subjects. Research on hypnosis, acquisition of chemicals or drugs, aspects of magician's art. No. What?
Magician's art?
Yeah, like slipping them a Mickey or something. How do you do that? Sleight of hand. Studies of human behavior, sleep research, behavioral changes during psychotherapy, motivational studies, studies of defectors, assessment and training techniques, polygraph research, funding mechanisms for MK Ultra external research activities, research on drugs, toxins, and biologicals in human tissue, activities whose objectives cannot be determined from available documentation. Anyway, it goes on, but it gives you a sense of what the hell was happening during this period of time. But again, this doesn't justify it. Obviously, it doesn't. But you're absolutely right that to have a full understanding of this, you have to look at the context of where we were at that time. And where we were was smack dab in the height and elevation of the Cold War. Knowing that our adversaries, our existential threats, were engaged in this sort of behavior. Now, George White was not really a researcher or anything. He was just sitting behind a mirror watching some people, get off. So clearly, and all the unwitting subjects involved. I mean, but look, they were slipping LSD to agency employees, right, without telling them.
Really?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. And I mean, it's just, yeah. So
it's not that long ago, but
not.
We have to think about it in terms of the same way we thought about Abraham Lincoln. That in the context of the times, this wasn't such a horrendous thing to do. They didn't know any better. I mean, it was really, they didn't know what these substances would do to people. And there wasn't a lot of ways to find out. You know, the Harvard LSD studies that they did, that they believe in part were responsible for the Unabomber. There's a lot of other shit that was responsible for the Unabomber, including particularly his childhood. But they did a lot of these studies because they didn't know. I mean, it's one way to find out. I mean, how do you get responsible human subjects? How do you get people to do? Well, there's not a lot of ways other than just test people.
Right. And unfortunately, yeah, what this ended up being was, like using the most marginalized people out there, like sex workers or prisoners or whatever.
Right.
And oftentimes, Johns or just but that whole thing. But where Tom O'Neill's book is really interesting in a couple of ways if you jump. So MK Ultra kind of finished up in '64 officially, right? That's when the Inspector General came out from the agency and said, "This you got to know, you can't do this." They had a new Inspector General and they looked and said, "This is clearly not where we are supposed to be." But interestingly, funding mechanisms that were used to dole out grants or to provide a cutout between government and research that was being done, did some of those continue to exist for other programs, other research? And in '67, you have the Summer of Love, San Francisco, and Tom O'Neill writes about this, and it's very, very interesting. But you had the Haight Ashbury Free Medical Clinic, right, which in part was running a couple of projects that were supposedly getting funding from the National Institute for Mental Health, which had previously been a funding mechanism also for MK Ultra, a few years in the past. And Roger Smith was a guy who was getting his PhD in criminology. He was working at the Haight Ashbury Free Medical Clinic, and he was also Manson's parole officer. And to your point, Manson was like a brook trout or a rainbow trout that is in some catch and release stream, right? He was constantly arrested during the '67, '68 period. And remember, the killings happened in August of '69, and he kept getting released. And he had been in prison, right? He in '67, early in that year he'd been released from prison, right? So he was on probation. Any violation, certainly some of the things he was getting arrested for, should have sent him back to prison, but he wasn't. So that to me is one of the most interesting parts of the book, is this revolving door that Manson was in. And eventually we all know what happened to him. But yeah, working at the Haight Ashbury Free Medical Clinic, that's where Manson would go, along with some of his followers. And they were, part of a study, and, they were, I'm sure, getting their LSD from there. But also this guy, Jolly West, who was involved in MK Ultra, also ended up having an office at the Haight Ashbury Free Medical Clinic. So, but again, to Tom O'Neill's
that
point,
clinic closed down about 4 months after Tom's book came out. Been open for over 50 years.
It's crazy. Yeah.
What are the odds?
Yeah, I know. What are the odds? I didn't see that coming. Yeah, but I mean, again, it's. I like the book because he does seem to be trying to let the facts of all his research lead the way,
right,
rather than trying to prove a point that he comes up with at the beginning of his book.
Well, he also exposed the prosecutor, Bugliosi, and all the issues that was going on with him that led to him wanting to follow the narrative that they had laid out, that Manson was trying to incite a race war and,
right,
and ignore all the other indicators that there was some deeper connections.
And yeah, was Manson was he an informer for the Bureau or for local law enforcement or some other outfit? That's
hard to tell.
Hard to tell, but it's compelling in light of the fact that he he kept getting released. He seemed to have a get out of jail free card.
He also seemed to have an unlimited supply of acid. That was what's fascinating. And he also seemed to employ the same techniques that apparently the CIA had employed when they had done experiments on prisoners, including the fact that he would, force them into weird sexual situations and pretend to take LSD himself but not really participate, and then, influence them. And he seemed to be doing things to them in terms of like trying to alter their behavior and getting them to do things that were outside the norm, including murder.
Yeah. I mean, did he have a sense from his time there at the clinic or dealing with, what's his name, Roger Smith, his parole officer, who again was also a criminology doctoral candidate, I guess, and so was but look, Manson was, he was not a rocket scientist. He was illiterate for the most part, right, until he ended up in prison and maybe
which is why it was so weird that he was able to manipulate so many people so well.
Right.
But it was also, it's like he was the perfect guinea pig. I mean, you're talking about a guy who spent half his life in federal penitentiaries.
Yeah, and also you're putting it in context of the time. What else did you have going on? You had sort of this awareness of the impact of LSD on the counterculture, right? So you had federal agencies like the Bureau, for example, worrying about, oh my God, what's the what are these hippies going to do next? Right. Are they going, and they were worried, obviously, about the Black Panthers, but it was also more than that. It was the again,
anti-war movement.
Yeah, just the general counterculture and the impact of drugs on it, and so it's a fascinating. I think it's a very interesting read, and I think it's worth the read because again, he's spent so much time trying to make his way through and get this
20 years.
book. Yeah,
it's a crazy story, and if you haven't heard the podcast, please listen to it with Tom O'Neill.